Welcome to our series number 3 on gut health. You have with us today the gorgeous gut gals. This is our new moniker because we are talking about the gut to a lot of people, and we want to let you know how important your gut is. So today we're touching on the gut health and its impact on insulin and insulin resistance and sensitivity. I'm Dr. Sally Good with Good Body, Good Brain, and I'm so happy to have my gorgeous gal with me. This is Clare George from the UK, and she is a wunderbar on coaching people on how to protect themselves and get better with diabetes. She's done it with thousands of people in the UK, and she has multiple degrees about managing behaviors and how to have new habits that will help us in our journey to be healthier throughout our whole lives. So, welcome, Claire. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Dr. Sally. Thank you so much for that lovely intro. We are definitely into creating this idea that our guts are gorgeous as well as ourselves, and yeah, it's a really great topic today. I think very few people really, as soon as we say insulin resistance, it sounds a little technical, but really it affects the vast majority of us, and it is behind so many of sort of disease and chronic conditions, especially as we age. And so it's a really important topic in relation to gut health. So I'm really excited for today's masterclass for sure.
Great. Well, let's start with something really simple. We talk about this word microbiome, and if we just look at it objectively, micro means little, bio is life. So we're talking about little life, and there's microbiomes virtually all over us. Uh, if you've noticed, a lot of hair commercials are talking about the microbiome of your hair. We have a microbiome around our eyes, and we won't talk about what critters live on our eyelashes. We have a microbiome on our skin. All kinds of wonderful things on our skin help us. And of course, the biggie is our gut, and it has trillions and trillions of, I call critters, and other people call them bacteria, microorganisms, fungi, and all kind of other things, but trillions of things down there that do a big job for us. They metabolize our food and turn it into the nutrients that we can use. They create all kinds of hormonal things, and they even turn on certain genes. So we have a genomic response within our gut. So it pays to treat it well because we are its host. We're like having a party down there, and we're the host, and we want to be good hosts. We want to give our party members good things. We want them to have a happy experience. So what do you think about that, Claire? What would your perfect party look like?
My perfect party would be one where it's just really good food, healthy food, nicely presented and arranged, right? Everything's there in a nice amount. It's not all over the place. It's not disorganized in disarray, and it's good and a good healthy. Not, I wouldn't want a load of fast food, all over the sides without any plates. I wouldn't want it to be like that, my party. And what I really want to think about, though, when we're talking about parties and being a host, is around are those critters you mentioned, those trillions of critters, and but they're all not all of them, not every single one, but there's many, there's thousands and upon thousands of different kinds of critters, and each like little community within our gut has a particular preference for certain foods and for certain diets. And so, not surprisingly, maybe, that those that really help our health, those that do some of those amazing jobs that you mentioned, Dr. Sally, the helpful bacteria and critters, they really like healthy food. And then those unhelpful ones, the ones that cause a few problems down below and across our health system, they tend to like that junk food and a lot of sugar and things, which we'll tap into. So yeah, I always love the way in which beginning that thought that we humans, we're organisms, and we host lots of tiny, tiny organisms within us. And when we start to think of it like that, they do jobs for us if we do the right thing for them, if we provide the right home and environment for them. They do little jobs for us and we provide a home for them. So that's our job done. That's why it's like this shared experience, really, even though we have no awareness, we go about our busy days. So really, truly, when we're talking about gut health, it always begins and ends with that reminder that we are hosts, that they have needs, those little critters have needs in order to be able to do all the cleaning up and all the little jobs that we'd like them to do for us.
And when we give them that really wonderful high fiber food like nuts and uh, plant-based foods, the ones that do the most for us get a big benefit from that, and we get the benefit from them metabolizing those, and it's their metabolites that produce all the good stuff for us. In fact, about 60% of all of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut. And when I mean a neurotransmitter, I mean something that normally we think that occurs in the brain. Like a really good one is serotonin. It's that wonderful, relaxing one. Even dopamine, where it gives us a little bounce when we're playing a video game or when we do something good or we have one of these attaboys or attagirls. We love that. And so if we don't get a really good, healthy gut, we're missing out on a huge amount of things that make us feel good. So the consequence of that is we start to get a little anxious. I've seen people who get very, very anxious because they have a terrible diet, junk food, junk mood. They feel depressed. If you're living on processed carbohydrates, I would I don't have a study yet, but there's one out there somewhere. I would guess that 50 to 60% of people who are living on that kind of diet just don't feel good, and their brain doesn't feel good, and don't have any oof. They're not getting enough dopamine. They're not getting enough of the things that make them motivated or want to go out and do things or even like have a wonderful walkabout in the garden.
Yeah, there's so many jobs going on within our gut system. And do remember that it's from all the way from our mouth all the way to where we poop, right? It's the whole lining of that space. When we talk about gut health, we're not just talking about tummies and
Right.
that, but absolutely. And it's and you touched on commenting on the role that our critters play when it comes to digesting and breaking down our food so that we can actually absorb those vitamins, those minerals, those different little tiny compounds that make up our nutrition, that nutrition, that good stuff from the food we eat. But it has to be kind of converted. It doesn't just sort of just, hit our tummy and then straight away it's ready for use. It kind of needs our critters playing a role and these helpful critters. And that's essentially where the our gut health and insulin resistance really, that's where it really centers. Um there's many ways in which gut health and insulin resistance are connected, but the main one that we're going to probably begin focusing on, I believe, is around this how food is digested, and in particular, sort of going sort of. But before I get into that, I do just want to actually we I realize that we haven't given a sense of what is insulin resistance. And as I mentioned at the beginning, many people, in those thousands of people I've coached, that it's a big word or couple of words, and can be quite confusing. So I do just want to give you a sense of what is insulin resistance. Well, insulin is it's produced in the pancreas, and many people go, oh, is that something to do with diabetes? And most people have got some familiarity with that, and it's true. Yes, it does. And what insulin acts as is it's a hormone that then enables in the process of glucose. It enables our bodies, the cells in our bodies, to receive glucose out of the blood. And so it plays this role like a key in a lock, and it comes along and it opens up the lock on the front of the cells, if you like, of your muscles, for example. And so the door opens, like open sesame, and then the glucose can go through. So insulin resistance happens when the insulin, the key, goes into the door, but the door doesn't open. And the cell is not available to, it's not open. There's no passageway, if you like. There's no threshold opening for, in this instance, glucose to go out of your blood and inside each of your cells that need it. And there's many reasons which we might be touching on today, but I just want to help you all understand what is insulin resistance. And so what happens is that cell, that lock on the front of your cell becomes less sensitive. And that's why it's called resistance, because instead of that cell opening up when insulin comes along to open up the lock, it doesn't work. It's resistant. It's like a jammy lock. Sometimes we've all got doors that have gone a little bit, they're a bit awkward and you have to lift them a little bit and
They're
do the key.
wonky. They're a little wonky.
They're wonky. Exactly. And that's what insulin resistance is like. The whole mechanism for opening up and allowing the glucose to go out of your blood and into the cells gets stuck, a little sticky, a little wonky. So sometimes it works, right? Sometimes you're like, oh, I just got it, and the door opens. And then other times you're fiddling with the thing for ages, you're getting quite frustrated, and you can't just seem to open the door. And that's what insulin resistance is like. Sometimes it'll open and the glucose will be able to get out of your blood and go into the cell. Sometimes it won't. And depending on lots of factors, which we'll cover some of today, I'm sure, around why is it sometimes, and what is it about a particular person's sort of health that is creating this situation in the first place. But essentially what needs to be understood is that there's three main ways, but there's multiple ways in which insulin, every time we're asking the beta cells in the pancreas to produce insulin, and we press that buzzer and we're like, okay, we eat some glucose, for example. The insulin key, the body, the brain wants to release the insulin to help it go out of the blood into the cells, and so it will buzz those beta cells in the pancreas to make and release insulin. And the thing that happens is, if we press that buzzer too many times, bzz, 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 and I like to call them in my groups Bill and Ben. So the beta cells, let's call them Bill and Ben, like the flower pot men,
For
right?
those of you who are not from the UK, beta is beta. So,
beta. Yes, pronunciation differences, cultural differences. What is it? Lost in translation. Hopefully not. GA. It's quite a word, that one.
Yeah.
But you'll follow me, I'm sure. But yeah, so those beta or beta cells, they're producing the insulin, and if we overwork them, if we're constantly requiring insulin to be produced for a few reasons, which I'll go over in a minute, then what happens is the body, it's a natural law of physics, actually, but the body basically just says enough. And it's like if we demand too much too often, the whole system breaks down. And that's when that's why it can be a little changeable, and one day you can eat certain foods and it'll work fine, another day you can't. It's not a nice easy straight snapshot thing. It's a moving, evolving process. But what I want to get across to everyone is that there's three main things that create this pressing the buzzer too many times, making the beta or beta cells produce.
Can I guess one?
And so, yes, go for it.
Sugar.
Yeah. So glucose is one of the top three. And before I actually get into a little bit about the glucose, let's go over the top three. So glucose and sugar. So we'll get into that in a sec. But glucose is a top three. And then after that, there's inflammation and chronic inflammation. That is another. If we've got chronic inflammation in the body, then there are calls upon it triggers, I should say, an insulin response to chronic inflammation. So you could be pressing that buzzer often and frequently. And then the third is stress and chronic stress. And if it's unaddressed and not dealt with, then chronic stress will be also requiring and triggering that insulin response by the body to try and deal with the chain reaction that happens in when we have chronic stress. And so those are the three biggest ways in which that insulin buzzer, that it gets triggered. And so yeah, but let's start, do you think, with glucose, unless there's anything else that you think to introduce this whole kind of insulin resistance, Dr. Sally? What do you think?
Well, I love that idea of the door. But I also want to say, why do we need the glucose? Like, it's our fuel. It's the fuel that gets into the energy of the cell, which is the mitochondria. And unless it gets glucose, it doesn't produce, it doesn't function optimally. So many people who have diabetes get very fatigued because they're just not getting innervated by the glucose.
Yeah, there's all sorts of, I mean, there's so many different ways because it's a body-wide
Mhm.
a situation. So there's a lot of different impacts, but I think what is important to note is that typically what will create insulin resistance when it comes down to glucose and your intake is that it is coming from our food and drinks. That's where, we're basically getting the glucose from. And so we consume this food, and if we consume a high glucose food, but say for example, you eat, quite a lot of carbs that when broken down is glucose, you eat maybe quite a lot of straight up sugar. But when we consume a lot of carbs and sugar on a regular, every day, have a high carb and glucose diet, what ends up happening is, and we're not very active, we're quite sedentary, say, what what can happen very often is that the stores within the cells, in particular in, say, the muscle cells, which is the biggest sort of mitochondria and energy stores in the body, is in the muscle cells, because that's what drives our movement. So all cells in the body need energy to do their job, but the muscle cells need more than most. And so what happens is, though, they have these stores, these glycogen stores, because once glucose goes out of the blood and into the muscle, it actually gets stored as this substance called glycogen. And what happens is we have certain amounts of storage room, shall we say. And when those stores are half full, a bit like, gas tank on your car. So if you've got a quarter of a tank and you go to put some more gas in your car gas tank, you can put it in, right? But if your gas tank is already full, you can't put more in. It'll just spill out onto your shoes. No, there's no more room. And that's kind of what happens within our muscle cells when we've been consuming a lot of glucose and carbs, but we haven't been using them up by getting
Mhm.
moving or other
So where
ways.
does it go? Where does it go?
So what happens is the muscles say no, and that's when the insulin key won't work, because they're like, no, the door's locked. We don't want any more. I haven't got room for it. And so then what happens is the brain senses that the glucose is just sitting like in the hallways in the blood, right? It's like the hallways of our bodies. And it's just sitting in the blood, waiting for those muscle cells to let it in. But the muscle cells are saying, no, 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 we're full up, thank you. And so what happens is the brain says, oh no, can't have this, because glucose is toxic in the blood. It's like a poisonous.
Important. Important.
So the brain says, okay, got to have a plan B. If the muscle cells won't take it and the cells won't take it, it's got to go somewhere else. So what the brain does is it says, plan B, fat cells. So the glucose gets put into fat cells, and then it goes wherever whatever cells will say yes.
Like
So
our
maybe
liver.
like our liver. And so maybe the liver, you know, that okay, and it goes into fat cells into the liver. Okay, and onto, you know, and around the liver. And that gets absorbed. And so then over time, that is what can create fatty liver disease. And so this is how once our body, our health, our glucose process and our insulin is getting out of whack, then what happens is not only is the insulin key not working so that the door won't open to those muscle cells and get it into where it's actually really wanted, but also it starts, the body and the brain starts putting that glucose in stores, in fat cell stores, and converting it into that in all sorts of parts of our body, from our brain, hence why sort of type is dementia is now often coined as type 3 diabetes,
Yes. Mhm.
you know, or in our feet, and then the diabetic foot and feet and neuropathy around that. So it could be anywhere in your body, frankly, but there are, you know, fatty liver and cognitive and sort of having stores
Mhm.
and fat cells and stores of glucose up in our brain, where it's not, our brain doesn't need that level and that
Yes.
amount. And so it's when it's being shoved. Like
Mhm.
I liken it to when, you know, you got somebody coming over. Last minute, someone says, I'm going to pop over. Are you free? I'll pop over to your house. Your
Oh
house
my
is in the,
God. It's terrible. I've got stuff out on the cabinets. Oh no.
we do. What do? We shove stuff places, don't we? That's what
Mhm.
most of us do. We're like,
Open it. Open it up.
yeah, anywhere, right? And it's not pretty, it's not tidy, and
Mhm.
hopefully you won't open that cupboard door because they'll see what a mess it is behind it. But when you invite your guest into your home, it all looks fairly tidy. And that's what basically happens with insulin resistance. It you know, the glucose that hasn't been processed in an optimal, in a healthy way, gets dealt with like that and shoved behind cushions and under rugs. And so that's what really is behind causing a lot of the problems. But we also touched on a couple of other key areas of
Can't.
behaviors that create insulin resistance. What
Yes.
about what on
Oh, well,
inflammation?
let me just, can I just talk a little bit about fatty liver? I, as a clinical psychologist, and I go into nursing homes that have rehab centers, often I get to meet and have sessions with people who have fatty liver disease. And they're usually in their 60s or 70s. They are not massively overweight, but they are overweight. And they have spent most of their time eating food that they thought was good for them, but actually turned out not to be so good. And they get what's called fatty liver syndrome. And the part about that becomes so dangerous is that your liver stops being able to do what it's supposed to do. And this thing called ammonia, we actually have ammonia in our system. It's processed by the liver, and the ammonia levels become quite high in the body. And when that happens, the brain can't function and starts to actually become delirious, and it's life threatening. So quickly, someone has to go to the hospital, get IVs, and sometimes even get dialysis to get the blood levels back down. So it's quite serious, fatty liver.
Oh, absolutely. And what was interesting to me, you mentioned that, you know, I've coached a couple of thousand more with preventing type 2 diabetes, but I've actually also coached nearly 1,000 people one-to-one at a GP medical practice. And yeah, the thing that was fascinating to me, so when most people I was supporting were 65, 70 plus in age. And if they had a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, within 2 to 3 years, they'd have a diagnosis of another chronic health condition. And within 5 years, I think something like two-thirds of people are 5 years after being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes have three plus long-term health conditions, whether it is, sort of liver, dementia, heart disease, different, it could be a whole number of different chronic health conditions. But essentially that my heart just used to really stop at this because
Mhm.
I just think, gosh, it really is a gateway moment. And the thing that I've learned the most over the last couple of years, coaching thousands on this, is just how reversible it is.
Yes.
And so
Mhm.
once you get to that place of being diagnosed and 5 years later and having multiple, no, that's not so reversible. That's not
Right.
straight, and that's not a very high quality of life. I can
Yes.
tell everyone.
Particularly with retinopathy, where the retina actually becomes damaged and you start to lose your eyesight, and neuropathy, which you can't feel your feet. And then just the insult to the cardiovascular system, heart disease, high blood pressure, all those kinds of things. And it is reversible. And I don't think that's the biggest message that people put out. It is reversible.
And it is, but it's one of those things that the earlier you catch it,
Hmm.
the easier and the more straightforward your journey will be with reversing, or even before prevention,
Yes.
preventing and reversing. And then
Mhm.
at each step of the journey there are options, and I just really want to get that across in today's masterclass. And that really truly, when it comes to insulin resistance, that yeah, this is why it's such a big player in the vast majority of chronic disease, and that glucose and glucose management and gut health and how our gut digests our food, and that sense that um, the the level of gut health we have and the role that that plays in our glucose management and therefore in our insulin resistance management. So that's how to bring it, so to explain to those listening how your gut health is related to insulin resistance. Because if you can get your gut health into balance, well, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you'll have I don't think you'll have glucose issues. You don't have a raised blood glucose. Because if you've got raised blood glucose, that means you've got a pretty high acidic internal environment. That's not going to be favorable to good gut bacteria. So you can try and cut your carbs and cut your glucose, or you could try and improve your gut, and that'll get your glucose down. It's
Mhm.
the same. It's just treating it as an outcome rather than as a goal. It's you're talking about really the same kinds of behaviors, whichever you're trying to achieve, whether you're trying to achieve good gut health or trying to achieve a lower blood glucose, you'd actually adopt very similar habits in terms of
Mhm.
your dietary habits specifically.
It's
And so maybe we
especially
could
movement. Yeah, yeah, movement. Again, with people with diabetes who are suddenly in a nursing home for some rehab, and their doctor says, "We want you to learn how to do some exercises that you can do at home, whether it's just walking or riding a bicycle or one of those things." And the person says, "Oh, I've never exercised in my whole life." And I go, "Aha." And literally they start doing the little bike in the rehab center, and their glucose levels start going down, and they need less insulin, which is done on a sliding scale. They take your levels, they give you the amount of insulin, however, how many bits you need, and they start needing insulin less and less. It's like a miracle, and they've never
it
done it.
it is, and no, exercise is brilliant for lots of different things. But let's talk specifically and touching on what you've said, Dr. Sally, around the impact exercising has on your blood glucose levels. And that's because when I was talking about before, if you remember, that I said that the if the glycogen stores are full, it's like a gas
Mhm.
tank full. We can't put more gas in. And so they start saying, no, no, I don't want any more. And then that, insulin resistance builds up over time. But if you're using up that gas because you're doing your exercise and your
Mhm.
muscles are like, and it's what's amazing to me is that the moment that we start getting into action, the moment we start moving our body, our muscles immediately, they don't wait for all the brain and all the things. They immediately start doing a chain reaction to take on more glucose out of the blood. So the moment you start moving, getting active, doing any exercise, you are without question going to be helping your situation. And obviously it's one big lever you've got. And I've mentioned many times about sort of cutting carbs and cutting sugars from your diet and getting that number down, so that as a percentage of your calories, but the movement is the second biggest lever. So ideally, what you should aim to try and do with your carbs is get your percentage of your calories. Um, you know, the average adult in the US and the UK is on about 70% of their calories each day comes from carbs and sugars, aka glucose. But what we'd ideally do is get that to 50% or below. And if you look at somebody who's really interested in their metabolic health and their biomarkers, they're talking about 25, 30%. That, there's some that go lower than that, but to be fair, there hasn't been research longitudinally to really know what the impacts are of, say, having 10% of your calories come from glucose and from carbs. That might not be healthy either. I'm a big
Right.
believer
Or
in
we might get in protein overload, but we do need some really good protein, some really healthy protein.
recognizing, just to give people a
Mhm.
sense, if you had 1,000 calories, you if your average or typical right now, about 700 of those calories will typically be coming from carbs or glucose. If you could get that down to 400, 500, something like that, then you'll be really, really helping your insulin resistance. And like we've said, it's reversible. So once you stop pressing that buzzer constantly for more insulin to be released to deal with this glucose by eating less, as quantity. But then I also do want to touch on another big lever, little habit that many people aren't aware of, and it's the frequency of how often we're eating. We're in a bit of an
Mhm.
overfed state,
Overfed, always
and
available.
always available. And so
Mhm.
if we could only, maybe cut out snacks and just eat 3 times a day, if we can close the window of when you start eating and finish eating, the more rest time you give your
Mhm.
pancreas and those beta cells, the more you're not pressing the buzzer for more insulin to be produced, then the more rest your body gets in that sense, and the more sensitive it becomes again. So that's really an important thing to note as well. But yeah, so movement is big. And but
Mhm.
then I think we should touch on the other two big areas with insulin
Mhm.
resistance and the gut. And maybe, although actually I say that, Dr. Sally, I think I've made a boo-boo, because I think what we really do need to make sure we get across when it comes to diet, yes, cutting those carbs, yes, cutting those glucose, but replace it with plants. You
Yes.
know, get that
High
gut.
fiber.
Yeah, yeah, and the probiotics, your fermented foods, your kimchis, your kombuchas, getting your kefirs, get
Sauerkraut.
that's it. That's what we need. And
Mhm.
so cutting your carbs, cutting your glucose, but then leveling up your gut health and getting it more in balance, because then those critters, they won't be demanding that junk food, and they won't be demanding up in your brain for you to have more glucose. And that way you can start to get balance in your gut and for your insulin
Now
is
you,
through
oh,
that.
it's perfect. Now you've had people come to you and say, I just can't help myself. I get such a craving for sugar that I go into the kitchen cabinet at 2 o'clock in the morning and I've got to get some sugar. Now that could be a couple of reasons. If they are diabetic, they really might need sugar. Or what's happening is their gut critters are out of balance. And the ones that want sugar because they've been given that diet and they're got the most real estate in the gut, they have the most say, and they're sending you messages. In fact, you could think of it as like you're not controlling anything, they're controlling you. That's a scary thought. I don't want any bacteria controlling my thoughts.
Well, they certainly play a big role. I mean, we have to remember that 60 to 70% of our neurochemicals are made in the gut. And very specifically, the neurotransmitters and chemicals that relate to cravings for sugar are
Mhm.
created in the gut. And so if we can create more critters that like healthy food, guess what they want us to eat? Or certainly less of the critters that don't, less of the critters that demand sugar. That will help you on your journey through what is one of the hardest habits to crack is cutting sugar. And
Mhm.
it's in
It's
everything.
so addictive.
It's so addictive. It's up there. It's a class A, I mean, it's below cigarettes, smoking,
Mhm.
but it's up there with class A drugs as addiction, strength.
Mhm.
And the other thing too, so go easy on yourself. If you're like, oh, I just can't do it, Claire. Like I have so many people saying that, and I'm just like, you can, but it is hard, and it does take a bit of time. And so go easy on yourself. Recognize it's going to be a journey to uncoupling, conscious uncoupling yourself from those sugar addictions and those foods, and recognizing the whole system around you. 64% of supermarket foods in the UK, in a classic typical supermarket, 64% have sugar in them. It's everywhere. So it's very, very hard. It's not something that that you can just kind of say a sentence and then do. But it is very doable. And I have to say that, yeah, in my groups, I get 85 to 95% of my groups, if they complete the program, they reverse that pre-diabetes from being an unhealthy blood glucose level to a healthy level. So I can honestly say that, and it is just through cutting carbs and cutting glucose, getting a bit more active. It's some fairly straightforward lifestyle habits that can do it. But do get support, do keep going, and do recognize it's going to be a little bit of a journey. It's probably not going to be a few day thing. It's going to take a little while for most of us. It did for me. It took a good few months to consciously uncouple myself from my glucose, my sugar
And
addiction.
the glucose hides under other names.
Really good
What
point. It's molasses, whether it's all those O's,
all the
um, you know,
oses,
yeah, maltose.
they're chemically manufactured versions of sugar because you can't sell sugar and make profit. You can sell sucrose and make a profit and all the other oses, but that's one of the reasons why we have those little sugar packets with different colors. Some are pink, some are green, some are white, some are yellow. If you really want to stay pure and if you have to have sugar, I'd rather you have the real sugar than the artificial ones because you've got a
Yeah.
good chance of kicking the real stuff. And it's in everything. You have to read labels.
Well, and the research shows that artificial sweeteners, like you're mentioning, are insulin spikers. So they will increase your insulin resistance, even though they don't contain glucose. And that's very confusing to many people in my
And to
communities.
your
They're like,
body.
okay, they're like, they can't quite get around it, but it's all to do with our gut health. Those artificial sweeteners are so bad for our gut health, which means they spike insulin. And that's because, moving on to that second sort of area, which is inflammation and chronic inflammation. And yeah, so those artificial sweeteners really create inflammation in our gut. And that inflammation requires a response, and the response is an insulin spike. And too many presses of the buzzers through inflammation means you get insulin resistance. So it's not just glucose, it's not just your carbs that to consider if you're trying to, reduce that insulin resistance. That and become more insulin sensitive, I should say. It is, there are these other things. Any thoughts on sort of, chronic inflammation and say leaky gut and how that relates to, gut health and insulin resistance and leaky gut, Dr. Sally?
Well, we hear that term leaky gut, and we don't really know exactly what it is. But I tell people, if you've ever eaten those link sausages, and you see how thin the actual gut, we're using mostly animal products. We're using the gut of the animal to stuff the sausage in. Certainly, if you're living out in the country, you do that, and you see how very, very thin that gut is. So when you have inflammation, it actually interferes with the actual integrity of the wall lining of your digestive system. And so the integrity of it gets damaged, the all the residue that's in your stomach can get out into your area, into the free floating peritoneum area out there. So your body says, yikes, invaders coming, coming. We've got to send some troops out there to take care of it. So white blood cells and all kind of other cells go to try to manage it, and then your inflammation gets higher and higher and higher. That's why leaky gut, and it's called by a myriad of things, overprocessed foods, etc., really tax your gut integrity and its ability to digest. So that's why leaky gut is so pernicious and does so much damage to us.
Yeah, and it links again to what we've just been talking about because chronic inflammation, it's like what creates that in the gut? Well, let's there's a few different things, but
Mm,
let's focus on dietary and the four biggest sort of inflammatory foods for anybody. We
mm,
might have a response that we are aware of, or we might not, but every single human body will have an inflammatory response of some level, some amount to the following: to sugar, red meat, dairy, gluten, alcohol. There's five that are
mm,
classic sort of
mm.
everyday foods and dietary foods for many people. And so when you have those, what happens is those are also very acidic and create this acidic pH within our gut. And so our lining, as you were mentioning, it is quite delicate. The
Mhm.
actual lining is delicate, but it should have a good thick mucus snot. Or
Yes, from good fiber.
from good fiber, from good and from a more alkaline environment creates
Mm,
that. And so if you're suffering from as you might imagine is connected to this leaky gut, like acid reflux or IBD or different, sort of constipation, diarrhea, different sort of gut related thing, then the chances are it's related to that mucus, that snot stuff that lines this thin lining has gotten so thin that then it's so easy to perforate. And that's why
yes.
many people in my groups, when I start talking about eating more nuts and seeds, they'll say, oh, but I can't. I've got diverticulitis. The doctor said, don't eat any nuts or seeds. They might perforate that gut lining. And so that is true. That is, and you do need to, for those listening that have certain conditions, they do
Mhm.
check with your doctor as to what is advised. But do recognize that that isn't a permanent state. That is an effect of not having good gut health and not having a good lining that protecting that thin casing stuff. And so what we need to do is we need to build up our gut health, get that snot. I'm trying to think of a better word, but there isn't one really. That
Mucus, mucus.
well, yeah, I was going to say mucosity, but then I'm sounding all
Yes, yes.
sciencey. I'd say snot.
Mhm.
My community health coaching.
Uh,
But anyway, you want that lining it, but to build that up might take a bit of time. But once you've rebuilt that, it's also one of those reversible things. Then you would be able to eat nuts and seeds, no problem, and your diverticulitis will go. It is one of those things that if you improve your gut health, these types of conditions are very, if not completely reversible, are very manageable, and you can get to a
yes.
place where you can eat foods that you've said for years, oh, I can't
Mhm.
eat that.
Mhm.
But you
The
can,
other thing
but
you,
you've got to do right
oh yeah,
first.
go ahead. You touched on compressing the time that you actually intake calories. And the fact that food is so readily available, we don't have to go out and hunt and get it, or we don't have to go outside and gather nuts and berries and salads and things in as we forage. The other thing is if you decide to not eat after 8 o'clock, it gives your digestive system time to rest. And we don't think of it so much as an organ that needs to rest. We like to rest our heart, our liver, our pancreas. We like to rest those things, but we don't think about our digestive system needing to rest and repair. And something starts to happen as it starts to rest. It's autophagy or autophagy, depending on where you're from. It actually, there's a cleanup crew that goes around your gut and cleans up all the things that needs to be taken care of so that you, the next day, when you have an intake of food, you get the best optimal response to that. And so if you stop eating at 8 o'clock and you wait at least 12 hours, like the next day, you don't eat again, the solid foods till like 8 a.m. or even longer, you're doing an intermittent fast, but not purposefully. It just happens automatically, and you'll find that your sensitivity to foods makes a shift. You can actually start to notice that when you eat things, how they feel in your system. Do they give you a good feeling or a bad feeling? And it sort of finely tunes your gut to be more optimized if you get that autophagy going on in the evening.
Yeah, no, you raise a really good point that the research has shown around insulin resistance that intermittent fasting is one of those smaller levers than your diet and movement, but still,
Mhm.
nonetheless, good little habit that for many people does really help them achieve sort of more sensitivity when it comes to their insulin, release and that system, and sort of really making sure that you really try. You'll need to figure out your bedtime, and by bedtime I mean sort of going to sleep, lying down,
Mhm.
going to sleep. But you really need to figure out that you stop eating. You don't eat any more food 3 to 4 hours, and the research suggests on drinks 1 to 2 hours. So
Mhm.
3 to 4 hours before bed, sleep, no more food. 1 to 2 hours, no more drinks, and then that'll allow that real rest for all of those busy Bill and Ben beta cells, beta cells.
Mhm.
It'll really allow that rest that they need in order to wake up tomorrow and go to work for you, and really
Yes.
have that oomph that they've had the rest and now they've got the oomph, because really truly we want to see every little part of us as like a
Mhm.
little person, a little helper. And we just don't want to overwork our helpers. They're there for us. They want to help us. But if we
Yes.
overwork them or give them really heavy weights to carry or heavy jobs to do all day, every day, relentlessly, never giving them a break, then they will start to malfunction. They will start to go on strike. They
Be
will start.
depleted. Like our
Yeah,
adrenal glands, we can deplete our adrenals, which brings us to the topic of stress. We haven't sort of touched on that, and we're kind of reaching the end of the hour. And
yeah,
stress as a lever, also too. I've spoken to many people who have been in what we call fight, flight, or freeze state for 10, 15 years. They don't ever let the body it's that would be lazy. I'm too no. If I have to sit down, I'm lazy. And it's a message that their mom or their other persons in their family gave them, like never to rest. And then also too chronic um, go go go. Your dopamine levels shoot up, cortisol levels shoot up, and cortisol levels over time, and then just doing a lot of adrenaline rush. Oh, got to get this done, blah blah. So your adrenal gland is always working, 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 sort of like the beta glands in your pancreas. And so unless you get this sort of leveled out, and we're talking again about balance, and we get into the part of our bodies that is the rest and digest part, we're not helping our digestive system, which does so much work for us in so many parts of our body. We think it's just like for food. No, it's for our brain. It's for our female hormones. It's for feeling good. It's for anti-anxiety. It affects us in so many, many ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those big three that we've been talking about today from our glucose and then chronic inflammation and now chronic stress, and recognizing stress and stressors can have different shapes and guises in our world. But if it's unaddressed, if it's just like that word relentless, I
Mhm.
really like that word because I really think that pulls up the right image around the kind of stress that is really going to increase your chances of having insulin resistance and being really bad for your gut. And I do have about I'd say it's about 15 to 20% of my groups on average. They're healthy weight. They tell me they have a healthy diet. I haven't gone and checked their kitchen cupboards, but I'm pretty sure they do. And they're active. They're doing 10,000 steps a day, and yet they've got high blood glucose. And do you know what? The minute I start talking about autoimmune conditions, as in chronic inflammation,
Mhm.
or stress, they tend to go a little sheepishly
Oh,
because
yeah.
you know because I've touched on something, and the other one that kind of nips in here connecting the two really is, and what you're talking about, Dr. Sally, is the role of sleep. And so that role that plays in resting and relaxing and de-stressing, and the role sleep plays, so it's an interplay thing.
Mhm.
But basically that chronic stress, yeah, is one of the big three reasons why somebody listening today might might be experiencing insulin resistance. And then because they've got insulin resistance, then the muscle cells aren't opening up for the glucose. It's not about how much they're eating or how much movement they're doing all that. But if you've got insulin resistance, because it's upstream, then you're still going to struggle to get that glucose out of your blood and into your muscles. So even though your insulin resistance might have been far more created by chronic stress, by decades of chronic stress, you're going to have the same outcome of being at a much higher chance of having type 2 diabetes because of the insulin resistance. And so this is why, one of the reasons why, because then once we, as we've already talked about, type 2 diabetes, then it's the whole body, the liver, the heart, the brain, and all the rest. And so what we really need to start recognizing is just how important it is to de-stress
Mhm.
and and to protect our sleep, and that they are just as fundamental to healthy aging and our health as our diet and exercise. And really, it can be a hard one because it's not what we've been hearing about for as long as
Yes.
we've been.
We should take a pill. We should take a pill, and that'll make us better.
So yeah, I think that's really, at the end of the day, is when it comes to chronic stress, it is about building those self-care practices. It is about working out what is stressing you, which people stress you out, what
Mhm.
place, what things, and what foods stress you and stress your body, and do less of them. And then have a list of all the things that replenish you, that
Yes,
build up
make you feel good.
good, and do more of that. And that really brings, I think, your gut, at the end of the day, there's a lot of gut instincts in any conversation around gut health. And
Mhm.
so your instinct should always be to do more of what's good for you and less of what's not, I think.
And listen to your gut. Oh, how many people have told me if I'd only just listened to my gut when I met that woman or I met that guy, my gut was telling me, danger, danger, but I didn't listen and bad things happened. So your gut is like your best buddy, your internal guidance system to let you know what's going on, even when your brain tries to override it. So that's why gut health, I think, is so important, not only for health and vitality, but just in good social relationships, decision making. It just touches everything, activities of every daily living. That's why it's so important. And that's why we're the Gorgeous Gut Gals. And we're so passionate and enthusiastic about getting you this information because most of you probably thought that you got diabetes because your mother or father had it. No. How many people say, "Oh, I'm prone to diabetes. My mother and father had." I said, "No, you're prone to diabetes because you're eating the same things they ate." So when you look at it that way, yes, it's preventable, it's reversible, and if there's any message I would say, yes, get on the preventive train right away. It's never too late, and with a little bit of education and just a little bit of baby steps every day, you can have a much more healthy life for you, your kids, your spouse, your grandchildren. You want to live a vital life so you can play with those grandchildren, have fun, and watch them graduate from high school, college, whatever.
I know, yeah, and I completely agree. I think that's a lovely way to complete this masterclass on insulin resistance and gut health, and just recognizing that, sort of insulin resistance, glucose, carbs, all that we've been talking about. Really, truly, it is, as Dr. Sally says, if you focus on your gut health, you can get all of that organized, but you'll get all this other great sort of gorgeous stuff too. And so, yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed today, and that you'll join us again for our next escapade into good gut chats, as I like to call them. And yeah, definitely looking forward to um, bringing this this wonderful masterclass to you all again next month with session 4 or
Yes,
class
session
4.
4. And it's been delightful as always. And I always appreciate all your wonderful years of work with people to help them to get healthy with healthy habits because Claire is the health habits coach. You can check out our website, get on our newsletter. You can learn so many things. And thank you so much for joining me today in this wonderful adventure. And we will be sending out a replay if anyone missed it or you want to send this to someone in your family, perhaps. So, all for now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you too. Until next time,
Bye
stay really
bye.